voting underway in Nebraska, and one of the things voters in the state are already deciding, the issue of medical marijuana.
Nebraska's Secretary of State certified 2 initiatives that would legalize medical cannabis in the state.
Tonight, John Chapman reports while the initiatives are already on the ballot, there is still a legal battle going on to decide whether they should be.
Both medical and adult use cannabis dispensaries are illegal in the state of Nebraska. But just about everywhere you look in the metro, THC or hemp shops are selling weed, buds of it, and byproducts of weed. People who sell these buds in the metro tell us this stuff will get you just as high as the legal recreational weed sold in Colorado. And the state collects sales tax on all of the weed sold in the state. But governors now and before are against legalizing medical marijuana.
This is a dangerous drug that will impact our kids. If you legalize marijuana, you're going to kill your kids.
Supporters of legalizing medical marijuana say it will help ease pain and suffering, especially in children. They gathered enough signatures to put the issue on this year's ballot. But the Nebraska Attorney General says they have uncovered thousands of questionable signatures and rules were broken, and everything in question should be tossed out. Maybe even voiding the election results of the initiatives altogether. Supporters of medical marijuana say the state is trying to sidestep the will of the people. They're also questioning the motives of the state. The legal arguing continued today in a virtual courtroom.
Secretary Evnen is essentially suing himself. He has essentially filed a claim against himself, seeking relief against his own decision. This is what Chief Justice Hebekin was getting in his concurring opinion that says the Secretary of State cannot make a decision and then try and unwind it after the fact.
I want to briefly talk about or respond to Mr. Gutman's claims that the Secretary is suing himself, that there's no remedy. We clearly disagree with that. We are asking for a declaratory judgment. We are asking you to assess the evidence that is being placed before this court. We're asking for you, Your Honor, to tell us, based on the allegations, whether or not there are a sufficient number of signatures to meet the constitutional requirement.
Judge Susan Strong overruled the motion to dismiss, so the argument will continue and it could be split into 2 separate trials. That will take time during the election and possibly after to determine if the ballots are legal.
So this presents a problem for the defendant sponsors, and I understand that because then it's kind of a moving target and you don't know what to focus on, and you have very precious little time in which to proceed.
If part of it were to occur before the election and essentially create an error that the initiative might be invalidated when it actually may not actually end up being invalidated by the second trial, which would create voter confusion.
Right now, supporters of legal medical marijuana in the state can only hope all these legal distractions won't have an effect on voters making a decision that could or could not stand. On your side in Omaha, I'm John Chapman, 6 News.
The argument over the validity of the medical marijuana initiatives will continue later this month.